We'll continue now with our study of the Beis Hamikdash, and we're up to the Heichal, which you'll see here on the bottom right column of page Vav. Of course, the Heichal, we're going from east to west, and we're moving right up to almost the Kodesh Kodshim, and the Torah calls it Kodesh. This is what the pasuk means when it says in Shmos Chavav, "V'hivdila haparoches lachem bein hakodesh ubein kodesh hakodoshim." So the paroches was the separation between the kodesh and the kodesh kadoshim. What is the kodesh? The kodesh is the heichal, and as we'll soon see, the heichal was the home for the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and for the Shulchan and the Menorah. How large of an area was it? It was 40 amos going towards the Kodesh Kadosh, meaning as you enter into the Beis Hamikdash from the east, you are going to go from the Heichal towards the Kodesh Kadoshim 40 amos. So that's called Mimizrach Lemara. Now we're going to add a width. How wide was the Heichal going from south to north? And that's 20 amos. So it was 40 amos by 20 amos. And honestly, for me, the biggest challenge here is to try to figure out how they fit everything into the Heichal. It's not a very large area. Fine. This is all based on Masechta Midos. And there's a difference between the height of the Heichal in the first temple as opposed to the second Migdash. In Bais Rishon, it was 30 amos high. And this is explicit in the Pasuk in Malachim. And in Bais Sheni, it was only 40 amos high. I'm sorry, it was 40 amos high. And that's a Mishnah in Midos. Now, the pasuk at the end of Tanakh in Chagai states that Gadol ha'achro min harishon, meaning that the last Beis Hamikdash, the second, was greater than the first. And what did he have in mind? The Heichal. That the Heichal in the second Mikdash was higher by 10 amos than the Heichal of the first Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara in Bava Basra discusses this as far as the Gova, the height of the Heichal. Now, when Chagai says in Nevuah that Gadol Habayis ha'achro min harishon, does he mean that it had a greater kedusha? The Gemara in Yuma says that there were 5 major elements in the Beis Hamikdash of the first that were lacking, that were missing in the second, implying that the first Beis Hamikdash had a greater sanctity than the second. The Aron, for example, was already in Geniza. There was no Aron in this. There was no Urim V'Tumim in the second. There was no miracle of Eish Min HaShamayim. So many of the facets of the first Mikdash were lost in the second Mikdash. And yet Chagai builds an entire pasuk around the fact that the Gova, the height of the Heichal, the second Mikdash, was 10 amos higher than the first. Therefore, that justifies Gadol ha'achro min harishon. Very, very strange pasuk. The only thing that comes to mind is that Haggai was really looking for, if I could use the term, an excuse, a peg to hang his hat on, that the second bias was greater than the first. And it was very difficult for him to find any dimension in the second bias that surpassed the first bias, because on the contrary, the second bias was almost a shadow of the first bias. but he found something in the Gova Heichal. And that itself, the Gova Heichal, was enough for Chagai to make this observation that the greater Migdash was the second Migdash. But how is that so? How could the second Migdash be greater than the first Migdash? Okay, you had a Gova of the ceiling over the Heichal. Very nice. Ezra and Nehemiah, during the time of building the second Migdash, they achieved that goal. But therefore, Gadol Achrom in a Rishon. And Reb Chaim Brisker used to say that Gadol Achrom in a Rishon is dafka because the period of Bayesheni was such a difficult period. They were missing Nevuah. They were missing, during certain parts of Bayesheni, the Kohen Gedolim, many of them were Stukim. There was tremendous poverty. And yet there was a Beis HaMikdash, and there was Hashra Shechina even during those difficult times. And that puts the second bias on a higher level in a sense than the first bias. In any event, he says that Kedushaso Gvoa Yosef Mibein Ha'ulam V'Lamazbeach Shlo Nichnas Kohen LeHechal Im Lo Rochatz Yodov V'Raglav. There was a higher level of Kedusha in the Heichal than that of the area of the Ulam, or shall we say between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. As far as the Ulam itself is concerned, we had a machlokes whether it had the Kedusha of the Heichal or not. And that was on the previous page that we discussed this. And the issue there revolves around the question of Shchitas Kodshim Kalim. We're not allowed to bring Kodshim Kalim into the Heichal, but can we bring it into the Ulam? So that depends upon whether the Ulam had the status of Heichal or not, as far as Kedusha. Let's assume that the Ulam was part of the Heichal. So there was an area going again from east to west, as we always do, from the Mizbeach to the Ulam. That area did not have Kedushas Ulam, and in comparison to the Ulam, it had a lower level of Kedusha. And that expresses itself in the halacha of Bia meaning entry. Who is allowed to enter into the Ulam, or for that matter, into the Heichal? Only a Kohen who was Mekadesh Yadayim V'Raglayim. But as far as the area to the east of the Ulam, which is outside the Heichal, in the Azara, where the Mizbeach was, even a Kohen who had not implemented Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim was allowed to enter there. Again, if he started the Avodah, as we discussed many times, he had to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. But as far as Bia is concerned, Knisa, only with regard to Heichal, the Bia itself generates a chiyuv of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. And this is a mission of all places at the beginning of Masechta Kelim. Now remember we spoke about small windows in those areas called the Beis HaChalifos in the Ulam. There are also small windows in the Sha'ar HaHeichal. So we have the Sha'ar, the opening into the Heichal, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we spoke about yesterday, that the opening into the Heichal was 20 amos, and it was 10 amos wide, and there was all sorts of beautiful decorations, tapestries, and artistic works that were there. But we didn't discuss what's called pishpashim. The pishpashim are those small openings. And they were on the sides of the Sharia Heichal. There were two of them on the two sides of the Heichal, and they were called Pishpashim. And these openings would lead you to Ta. And if you look at the next paragraph, he says, Ta'im misviv lahechal. There was an entire shura, a whole line of Ta'im that surrounded the Heichal. And the word Ta'im, or the singular is Ta, is also similar to a chamber. And these openings on the sides of the Shara Heichal would lead you into these various chambers, the first of which would surround the Heichal on three sides. So let's read it inside. He says, Psachim elu, these openings, these pathways or entryways, hovilu, they brought you into the Taha Rishon. Again, we're going to see that there were many, many ta'im, and the first one on this series of this line, which covered and surrounded the Heichal on the north, south, and west, and these pishpashim led you into that area around the Heichal. Now, the reason why the Mizrach is omitted is because that's where you entered into the Heichal. So there were no chambers there. That was just an opening, an entrance. Then he writes that the Pesach HaTzfoni, right? We said that there were the Ta'im surrounded the Heichal on all sides. On the north, Hayunichnasim Darko Kol Yom. When they entered into the Heichal, they entered from the north. Kidei liftoach el dalsos ha'Heichal, shahayu niftachim mibifnim. So again, you have to use your imagination to sort of, the gap between the written word, and the picture in your mind. But what I can gather from this is that the door of the Heichal, we have doors that you pull out. Here you pulled it in. If you're inside the Heichal, you would pull the door towards you. That's called niftachim mibifnim. You would open it from inside the Heichal. And we're talking now about the opening that was on the northern side. And that was the one that was used on a daily basis. Now, I'm not sure, is there any connection here between the first part of this and the second part? In the first part, he says that there were two openings, these pishpashim, on the two sides of the Heichal. And these openings led you into the Ta Harishon, which was a shura of time that surrounded the Heichal on three sides. Then he goes on to say that the opening on the north side was the one that they went into on a daily basis. And that's where they opened the doors of the Heichal. So if I understand correctly, on the northern side, where there was a Pesach, right next to the Shar of the Heichal, that was on the northern side, which would be, if you're going from east to west, would be on the right side. So that particular Pesach, which is called Pishpesh, on the northern side was the one that they entered into on a daily basis. Nichnasim darko kol yom. So that the Shara, the Heichal, had doors that were closed. You went through the Pesach on your right side to enter into the Heichal, and then you swung around towards the left to open up the doors of the Heichal, because the doors of the Heichal would only open from the inside. Mitzad hapnimi. Now he doesn't tell you which Kohanim were responsible for this daily opening of the Shari Ha'echel. Was it the Kohen Gadol? Was it other Kohanim? He doesn't, right now, he doesn't address that question. So Nichnasim Darko, they went into this Pesach on the north side, which we said was towards the right. Kol Yom, on a daily basis. Kedei Liftoach Es Dalsos. It should say Es Dalsos. There's a printing error here. Just noticing that. Liftoach Es Dalsos HaHechal. Shayu Niftochim Mibifnim. Okay. Now, what about the other opening, the other pishpage, which was on the right side, on the left side, meaning on the daram? Lo nichlaspo adam me'olam ki Hashem yavo bo ki kakasuv b'yechezke. So this was an entryway kaviyachol for the divine Shechina to go through on the south side of the Shar HaHechal. Ta'im misviv lahechal. Shuras ta'im sviv lahechal. He says, Ta'im elu hayu asuyim litem sham b'mishmar es hakesef ve'azav. These chambers were where they locked up the silver and gold and any expensive item that belonged to the Beis Hashem. Now he has a suffix here as to whether the Ta'im, where they stored the Kesef and Zav in the Heichal, had the same Kedusha as the Heichal. He has a diagram here on the page, but I don't know, it doesn't do me so well. If we go back to the main diagram of the Mokom HaMikdash, so here he has the Heichal, which you enter into from the Pesach HaHeichal. So you go from the Ulam to the Pesach HaHeichal, and he says that on your left, which he calls the letter Ayin Vav, if you happen to have the same, is Pishpashim. So he has two Ayin Vavs, right? One on the right, which is towards the north, and one on the left towards the south. And those would lead into these Ta'im, which you'll see surround the Heichal on all three sides, except for the eastern side, which is where the Pesach HaHeichal is. And then he has pictures of the menorah, the Mizbeach HaZav, the Shulchan for the Lechem HaPanim, and then you enter into the Kodesh Kodshim. So Ayin Zayin, Ta'im Shemisviv Lahechal. This is this entire area. It goes from east to west, from south to north, and from north to east, on all those three sides. Now let's count how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It seems that there were 13 Ta'im surrounding the Heichal, and we vacillated as to what status they have. I'm going to assume right now they have the same status as the Heichal. And Hayu Bnuyim B'Shalosh Komot. They were built on 3 levels. B'Tzafonu B'Darom, on the northern and southern sides. That means to your right going straight and towards your left going straight until you hit the Kodesh Kodshim is Bechol Koma Hayu 5 Ta'im. Wow. So these Ta'im are actually built one on top of the other, going up on three different levels. And on each one of these levels, there were 5 Ta'im. So if we multiply 5 times 3, we get 15. So there are 15 Ta'im just on the northern and southern side. B'marav ha'echel hayu shtei komot. So towards the west, there were only 2 floors of chambers, and there were 3 ta'im on each of those 2 floors, so you add another 6. So that leads to 21. Ubekoma elyona hayu rak shnei ta'im. One second, we had 15 and 6 is 21. So if we multiply that by 2, because we have the Komel Yona. No, the Komel Yona had only 2 ta'im. Sacha Kol 38 ta'im. Wait a minute, so how did he get 38? Let me just figure this out again. They were built on 3 floors. On the northern and southern sides, each one of these komot had 5 ta'im. So that's 5 times 3 is 15. Now we get to the west side. On the west side, there were only 2 komot. Shtei komot hatachtonot, 3 ta'im. I assume he means on the west side, if I got that correctly. That's another 6. So we're up to 21. How did he get to 38? Ubekomayel Yonah hayu rak shnei ta'im. That would give me 23. I don't catch how we got. Did you catch how we got from 23 to 38? So there were ta'im on 3 sides, and they were each built 3 komot. And bechol komayu 5, so that's on the tzaf of the daron. It's 5 times 3, 3 komot. Each komah had 5 ta'im. That gives you 15. Am I right? Now we get to the western side. There are only 2 komot with 3 ta'im, so that would give you 6. 15 and 6 is 21. And Komel Yona, there were 2 ta'im. So 21 plus 2 is 23. I don't get it. How did he get 38? If anybody has an answer, if you could write me, I don't want to belabor the point because it's getting a little later, but see if you can write me a little email. I expect to get a flood of emails today to explain to me how he got to 38. 38 ta'im. Okay.